And I'm exhausted.
My mission today is a little unique. Many of us are very common with the discussions we're having today, very aware of what's happening around our market, very conscious that we have to change business models, organisational structures, fee structures, and engage consumers. My job mission today is to give you a real story, to take away, to share within your organisations, your peers, your friends and family around putting a face to this change. And this face I've named as Isaac. Isaac is very deliberately chosen by me. Isaac Lim is the most popular boy's name and boy's surname from Singapore in 2007. Okay? Very, very important year, which we'll get to in a second. But Isaac is going to be the character for a story I'm going to tell you today. So what I'm going to do is just look back a bit and think, where are we? What are the trends? What are the key parts we need to remember when justifying our existence and change in the world? And the reality is banks haven't changed much in 100 years. The current checking account hasn't evolved all much. The form factor from passbooks, checkbooks and debit cards has changed, but the account and the economics behind it has not changed all that much. And one of the most important parts of that is we still operate on currency, or a tangible version of currency. Because remember, even the money we carry today is not value. It's a promiseful value. There's a plethora of documentation out there on the instruments of what we use as currency throughout the world and how they have evolved. We've seen here multiple iterations where we've gone from gold coins in a leather pouch to carrying wads of cash to checkbooks. And then we had one massive quantum leap when cards came around, is money exponentially became digital. And digital does something that we've all seen in a number of different facets through the dot-com boom, the social media boom, the big data boom. It creates an open transparency, a platform that we can all get embraced and engaged in. Something we can understand, share, tell stories about, document, photograph, Instagram, to basically say that the ecosystem of money has changed. It goes beyond just a physical instrument of a check or a cash. And that's important because what happened in the last couple of years is under the scrutiny of a whole generation that had the power of social media, we saw a crisis back in 2007, 2008. The crisis itself undermine the trust of an industry that's been around for centuries. But what's not important is what did or didn't happen in the financial crisis. It's around how did consumers actually understand that, share it, and actually react to it. And the reality is this is what happened in the market. We saw mass exclusion. Credit applications, declines actually increased. Massive amounts of numbers. People actually protested outside banks. We had Occupy Wall Street, Occupy London. Massive movements. Didn't quite yet get the scale of the Arab Spring, but they got pretty good. But what really happened in there is we now have a crack. We have a crack in an industry that's been a pillar of society for centuries. And that crack has the ability now to either be an opportunity for the incumbents to address or to become irrelevant. It's a turning point in history. Unfortunately, what we're seeing since the financial crisis is we're seeing an overwhelming amount of voluntary exclusion. And what I mean is people choosing to do their financial services by other means, either to avoid friction, to get more convenient products, more engaging products, or better experiences. You've seen many of the names earlier today. But what's really happened is this is the trend we all have to pay attention to. The fastest growing transactional product or deposit product on the planet today is a prepaid card offered by Green Dot in the United States. It is a general purpose reloadable card. It is non-interest bearing and non-interest paying. That's important from a consumer's perspective because it removes all of those what's debit interest and credit interest questions. Fees become transparent. This actually fits in with the cultural norm of a whole entire generation. And as you can see here, it's growing exponentially every single year. $672 billion sit on prepaid cards in the US alone today. But this is what we usually hear from the banks. Now, I assume everyone here is excluded from this bucket, but more often than not, I hear the regulator hasn't told us what to do. We're targeting high net worth. Customers really want branches, and there is no business case in mobile. Simple, easily to throw at you statements that are, in essence, in isolation, are justifiable. They are defendable, as I think we mentioned earlier. But the challenge is that they don't address the overlying problem. So what we need to do is, let's have a chat to Isaac. Let's do some real customer development here. Isaac is born the 29th of June 2007. Who in this room knows the importance of that date, other than Matt Dooley? Is the release of the iPhone. And this is important in a whole number of industries. It changed an ecosystem. Apple wasn't the first to have a smartphone. They weren't even the first to have a smartphone with downloadable applications. But what they did is got nothing to do with the hardware they put in your pocket. It's the ecosystems they created with the App Store. It transformed entire industries overnight. Music industries, book industries, service industries, literally almost changed their whole behavioral norm. And what actually happens with a generation like Isaac is they grow up in a world where their social, their behavioural and their service norms are totally changed, where Isaac has no idea what Encyclopedia Britannica is. Why? Because after 244 years in print, in 2011, this is now out of print. You cannot buy an Encyclopedia Britannica unless you go to an antique store. He will never know what junk mail is. So the idea of mass market advertising in your mailbox, he will not even think to check for mail. It's not in his psyche to check for mail. He doesn't expect it. He'll never go to a peep show. Yeah. The reality is from the comfort of his own home, there's digital alternatives here where his anonymity is even better than having a trench coat and a hat as he walks down the alleyway to get into this place. He won't know what the classifieds are. Totally foreign concept to him. It's something that we've grown up with as multiple generations through birth, deaths and marriages, selling things, finding your first part-time job. He will not look to the classifieds. He'll look at the likes of Craigslist and eBay to do the same things. He'll not even, this is the most foreign, this is unbelievable. He will not know what a landline is or the yellow pages is. One of my biggest opinions is the taxpayer-funded yellow pages is one of the, because the production of them is still very much taxpayer-funded, is the biggest waste of money because look how much paper they're producing. They send that to every household in the country. Yet no one actually uses it anymore. It's actually out of date within a month. A little Fandeckle device that came out in the late 80s, early 90s is obsolete in Isaac's world. If anyone told Isaac, can you fax me that? He'd be like, what's a fax? But then we get some technologies that are even closer to home. The optical disc is not that old, less than 2 decades. We bought music, we bought movies on these things, software. This optical disc is now obsolete. The broadband internet and high-speed internet around the world has meant that all those things can be distributed by other means without having to go anywhere. Cabled networking. Those thousands of kilometres of backbone of your organisations is now irrelevant because if you look at most modern organisations, like I had a very fortunate opportunity of visiting Square's headquarters in San Francisco, there is no cable network. Everything is Wi-Fi from day one. That's a whole new way to structure the infrastructure, to position the infrastructure you actually use for your organisation. And this is what happens to industries when these things happen. Borders and Blockbuster, previously dominant in their industries, are now bankrupt. Do we know anyone else that uses the same model as Borders and Blockbuster? Sorry if there's anyone from HSBC in the room. And another artefact, the check account. The check account is probably the economic instrument underneath a checking account. It's the most common used transactional product on the planet. Yet Isaac will not even know what a check is. So when he has to go to a point of sale machine to swipe his prepaid debit card and it says check, savings or credit, what's he going to press? Bankers. This is the most important number in a banker's customer life cycle. Does anyone know why? Any research firms in the room? No? No research firms. Overwhelmingly globally, in the new economy, your first account that you have to get, by the way, is usually an employment or a university reason, is at the age of 17. Things like 71% of all new bank accounts are opened at the age of 17 in terms of people's life cycle. And that's a brand affiliation that you will keep for life. Now, in a customer's life cycle, it's very rare you actually change your banking relationship other than from a mortgage or a wealth management point of view to major lifestyles. Brand resonance here is very strong. I always point to one of the best case studies of knowing this number was Commonwealth Bank in Australia. When I was a kid, who do you think is the first bank I opened up, which bank I opened an account with? It was Commonwealth Bank. Why? because I had a brand affiliation well before 17 because I had a Dolomite account. Dolomite account was this little piggy bank they used to give to every public school student in the country. And they would send a branch manager, well, I don't know if actually they were a branch manager, but someone came to the school once a week and you had a fictitious little process of making a deposit at your school. It was a habit you built up every week from the age of 5 to usually the age of 12. No cigarettes. But what this meant is that when I turned 17, I had a brand affiliation that predated my schooling education. And it meant that the very first brand that came to mind with choosing an account was Commonwealth Australia Bank. Now the reality was when I was in Victoria, so that was actually the State Bank of Victoria. State Bank of Victoria got acquired by Commonwealth Bank, but still Commonwealth Bank. So let's think about Isaac. He will choose his banking relationship for life in 2023, in 10 years' time. Key question, are we ready to bank Isaac? Now we have some time. Knowing all of his norms, his behavioural tendencies, how he evaluates things, are we ready to bank him? But let's have a look at some of his friends. This is Timmy. He met him at Legoland. Timmy is born the 21st of November 2000. Also a very important date, and I've also mentioned this. For two reasons. Very first smartphone, the Nokia communicator. Also, the birth of PayPal. In Timmy's world, both of those things are not new. They were there from day dot. If you tell him that the world existed without these two things, he'll be like, no, they've always been there. He will choose his primary banking relationship in just 3 years. Other friends, Isabel and Ethan. Again, the two most popular names in Singapore on their birth dates. Very important because they're a hybrid in between somewhere. Ethan on the right is born the same day as the iPod. So digital music is a norm in his world. He doesn't need to buy CDs. He might use Napster or a BitTorrent to download it, but digital music is the way he procures music. It's how he expects music to behave. That translates to other industries. His sister, Isabel, is born the same day as Google. The dates that they will choose their primary banking relationship, Isabel will choose it next year. A child the age of Google will choose their primary banking relationship for life next year. And that's a benchmark that you'll be set against when they evaluate that account opening process. Ethan, a few more years, you've got till 2017. So let's talk about that consumer. The reality is over the last 10 years, the consumer has been increasingly digital. Gadgets are not things just left for techies. My wife has an iPhone. That's a norm now. You don't have to be intelligent or techie or innovative to get on these things. Kids the age of 1 and 2 know how to use iPads. Behavioural norms that will be digitally injected into their head to say that I expect this to work in this way. There's 1,000 videos on YouTube that shows a child getting frustrated with a print magazine because their norm is an iPad. They're used to going like this with the iPad and they go, hang on, this thing doesn't work. What's wrong with it? No, get it, throw it away. There's 1,000 videos like that on YouTube. Social media has democratized their opinion. Forget what it does from a social point of view and a community point of view. What it means is that if you have a crazy idea, you can share it. And if enough other people also like that crazy idea, you can build scale. And guess what? Get enough scale, you can topple a dictator, as we saw in the Arab Spring. Prior to the Arab Spring, there were just 12,700 Twitter accounts in Egypt. 10 days later, 23 million, and the dictator was ousted. That's the power of social media and how an opinion can be democratized beyond the traditional means of control and censorship. The internet means that things move at a much faster pace. Things come and go faster. It's computers, technology, books move at such rapid rates. I mean, there's too many statistics on here to cover. But basically, 24 hours on the internet is a long time. This is just 60 seconds. And this is the new world. These are the retail brands that will shape the expectations of Timmy, Isaac, Ethan, and Isabel. An entire generation that grow up with these as their assimilations. That Spotify will be how they expect music to behave. That Facebook will be how they expect networks and content to behave. That Apple and Samsung will dictate how hardware and ecosystems should work. Amazon will dictate how they actually consume books. This psyche will be injected in the head, nailed, stamped in there and branded. And they'll take that expectation to a bank. And this is how fast it can move. The radio took just under 4 decades to reach commercial scale. But look down the far right there. iPhone apps got 1 billion downloads in less than 9 months. Angry Birds, 35 days. Okay, yes, it's a game, but it's an idea of how fast something can spread in this world. If you're good enough at what you've designed, if you hit a sweet spot, you can get mass scale in 35 days. Interesting point here is that Square, now the 7th largest merchant acquirer in the United States, has no marketing or business development or sales department. Yet they've got to that point just because they have a highly engaging audience that share it themselves verbally. And importantly, and this is the big shift, is we've removed the idea that anything needs to happen in a physical place. As we said before, we have one of the most powerful devices in our pocket already that opens up a world for an entire new ecosystem. And this is important because if you think about the book industry, they went through 2 large quantums, two large leaps. The first was we had a physical product sold through a physical distribution network. That's Borders. We then had the Books 2.0 kind of scenario, which was Amazon, where they sold a physical product, still distributed as a physical product, but through a digital means. Then came the kicker. We changed the product from book is not a book product. The book is just a collection of words. Let's sell it digitally through a digital ecosystem, completely disintermediating the idea for any store other than ours. Ebooks now represent 22% of global book sales, growing exponentially. From the day the Kindle, the most successful ebook reader on the planet, came onto market to the day that Borders went under was just 33 months. That's the kind of time frames we're playing with as modality pushes things through faster. So let's go back to Timmy. Push forward to 3 years' time, 2016, when he decides he wants a bank account. You give him your usual spiel. Can you come into the branch, fill in this form, you bring your 100 points of identity, and we'll give you a product in 5 or 6 days. And we'll send you a checkbook, sign this little piece of form, and that's how we're going to verify you for the rest of your life. Maybe a couple of other little identity points. His response is, so you're saying I have to come to your branch to open an account? Fuck that. Why? What happens straight away? Tweets it. This is important because this is when his opinion basically gets scale. This is happening already in small amounts around the world. This happened to Bank of America through the debtors' revolt when one tweet forced them to do a public apology on the changing of an APR on a credit card. This is a reality that happens now. It's not that far away. And the idea is what's happening is open transparency in every part of that ecosystem, from account opening to fees, the economics, everything around that product is now 100% transparent. And as we went through on the panel previously, that means the economics of your products are going to be disclosed in the next 5 years. That is an absolute given. Consumers will understand money markets, they will start understanding Basel II, maybe not in all its intricacies, but they will start understanding what you're doing with that money. If you have a look at all the disruptors that happen in this space right now, all they are doing is simplifying the complexity. And these are their champions. These 2 guys embody transparency. Zuck on the left really embodies personal transparency. How does everyone understand who I am, what I'm doing, what I stand for, what I like, what I dislike, as a means of getting to know me better? And a lot of brands are actually leveraging that as an opportunity, because then what we can do is bring into an area of context. Because if you understand me, your delivery of context is a lot stronger. The guy on the right, anyone doesn't know who this is? He's famous for making the most secret things transparent. Whether you like him or hate him, he's done something that's totally influenced a generation that will be an expectation of every industry over the coming decade. And what's resulted is some of the most disruptive brands of our time in this industry. PayPal is not new, it's been around for a while, but Square, Simple and Dwolla are less than 5 years of age. Square now processing massive amounts of volume. In fact, Square has got to the point where they processed $12 billion last year. 1/8 of all US merchants are signed up to Square. It's getting big scale. This is not coming, this is here. And the interesting part is most people focus on that little piece of white plastic up there on the machine. This is not Square's innovation. This is. It's interesting that Nikki completely missed the idea of Square's wallet. Square's wallet is what gets them scale and experience design. The idea is that I can walk into Sightglass Cafe in San Francisco here. It'll automatically tell Sightglass that I am here. It'll put my photo on their point of sale machine. I'll order my double espresso and never take my phone or my wallet out of my pocket. That's complete disruption. What will happen at the merchant side is this. Zoe Evans is here. She bought a double espresso. Pay. It's all done. The experience is completely frictionless. Everything is about making an engaging experience at that point of sale. PayPal did $12 billion as well last year, just for comparison. And we're seeing a number of ecosystems all around the world, from the efforts of Samsung and Visa at the London Olympics, ISIS's attempts in the United States. I said basically we're seeing ecosystems all around the world actually get commercially viable scale. But that consumer also can influence your brand, and this is where it gets real. This is a case study done on the Bank of America back in 2011 over a 90-day period, mapping the sentiment of their brand against their share price over that period. Now, for the year, granted it was a bad year, 50% down on share price. But what's interesting, and I don't have a pointer here, is that you'll actually see the blue fill-in line is what's called the sentiment against the brand, while the green shade-in box is the share price over a period of time. With 86% accuracy, human sentiment, behavioural sentiment on social media, was able to predict every increase and decrease by 48 hours. Imagine if you go to your board and say, I can tell you exactly the share movements with a 48-hour notice period. I'm pretty sure they'll fund something like this pretty quickly if you can say that with 86% accuracy. There was a hypothetical algorithm implemented in this period as well to say that if you were to use sentiment-based algorithmic trading, how would you perform? For 90 days, 3,751% up without any leverage. Like, that's just phenomenal calculations. Every up, every down. Yes, they were trading shorts and they were trading longs, but they were able to go. So let's get out of the theory. Let's think about what we're going to do going forward. Is there anyone in this room that's a pilot? Wow, we've got a pilot. Can you fly one of these? No. I like to compare this to banks, because this is what you fly. A bank is not dissimilar to an A380. This is big. This is complex to learn, and it takes time. It takes hours of practice to figure out how to fly this thing, let alone land this thing. So what happens when I say land it here? This is a tough task. And this is an analogy of the task we have ahead of us of moving banks with a new consumer. We need new approaches. We need new ways to figure out, damn, that A380, how are we going to do this? There's nothing in the textbook that tells us how to do this. The federal regulator won't tell us how to land the plane. We've got to figure out how to do this. And I know technology in most banks these days is still a cost center, but I'm trying to champion the idea of almost the dissolving of technology as a cost center, and as now a very front of the line strategic contributor to the direction of the business. And the reason I give that is if you go to any of those disruptors I spoke about before, none of them have a technology department. Not a single one. Why? Because the engineers that write the code sit right next to the people that derive what's a business value. They're involved in that discussion. So when I talk about lean startup before, the very people that contribute right across the organization for a single piece, if you're focused on transactional products, everyone that's focused on transactional product is involved in that discussion. Technology is your business. And the customer is the person that owns their relationship. Through the democratization of opinion, through transparency means, is a person who is ultimately in control is the customer. Because if they don't like you, they're going to move on. This is an important mindset because it helps you then thinking about who do you have to ask to solve problems. You have to ask the customer. You also have to think about getting out of the building. It's around understanding that you're now mobilizing a utility. And what is that utility? Describing that utility. What is the utility to the consumer? How does it empower their life? How does it empower their lifestyle, their aspirations, their dreams, their goals? How do you give them the tools to make smart decisions in everyday life? in important lifestyle decisions like buying a home. One of my biggest challenges is the biggest cash cow in a retail bank is still the mortgage business. Yet the mortgage business is still a product-based business. When a consumer today buys a house or even comes to get your mortgage, the reality is that 65% of their process of selecting a mortgage is done before they even walk in the front door. There's a number of online choice engines. They'll ask friends and family. There's magazines to read. There's a plethora in sources of information for them to decide on which product they need to buy a home. Because that's the important part. In their life, they're buying a home. They're not buying a mortgage. And getting a part of that is very important. And being aware of what context they do that in. Where are they? Where are they physically? What is their lifestyle needs? Are you look at the guide algorithm like Target? Making sure that you remove all of the clutter. One of the biggest pain points of banking and clutter right today is everyone's.com. And there's some good examples in the world. I still champion Rams as one of the best on the planet, Rams in Australia. But it's saying is that, why do you have a newspaper as your .com? Something that you're trying to appeal to every single possible audience that lands on there. Even Google can add context. Why can't a bank? Really, really simple stuff. You know, I'm a 22-year-old male living in Singapore. I'm not really 22, but anyway. So why would you sell me... Thanks, Neil. So why would you sell me investment products? Why would you give me your latest AGM minutes? You know, I don't need that stuff. Get rid of it. As soon as you know who I am, get rid of the clutter. Start creating experiences, realizing your products are just means to fulfill something else. You're buying a home, buying a crazy ivory white suit. Is empowering that. How do you empower that decision? I'm pretty sure he bought them when he's drunk, but anyway. Empower that life. Is realizing what's the soft and warm things, what I said, the hardware we spoke about before, that happens in our everyday lives, and empower those moments, anytime, anywhere. Biggest frustrating thing in banking is the second you go for a holiday in Thailand, is the moment that their fraud engine cuts your card off, and you're without any cash for 48 hours for them to fix it, and you've got to call them at 3 o'clock in the morning because it's a different time zone, and they'll open that then. Those kind of scenarios shouldn't happen anymore. So it's time to transform. This is how we're going to do it. I spoke about lean startup before. This is something you've got to get in your head. Startups do, in 3 days, what takes you 6 months. And by that I mean they remove wastage in assumptions, so they don't run with balls that they're going to go nowhere. They validate things early, and they don't overinvest with resources on things that are are still purely based on assumption. This is an important thing. This is how they move faster than you. You have to have your teams that are on the cutting edge, being able to move faster or as fast as the startups around you. Using methodologies like, how do you build, measure, learn? In tiny little increments. So that you can turn things around in 24, 48 hours. I loved Neil's little 48-hour hackathon thing. Hackathons is where a lot of ideas actually come out of. Even Jack Dorsey's Square came out of a hackathon he actually did with a friend to attempt to find a new way that he could, a friend of his could accept payments for his glass art, his blue glass art, and he couldn't accept credit cards for $300, $400 products. Put it through a hackathon, out came Square. And when you do that, realizing that the user comes first. How do you engage with them? How do you help them engage them in the process of validating, invalidating any assumption in your ideation process? And look at this guy, the godfather of customer development. Who knows Steve Blank? If you don't know Steve Blank, read his book this afternoon. 4 Stages to an Epiphany. This is how you find ideas that are going to make a difference. How do you engage an audience? Ask them the right questions. Test hypotheses. Test them again. Iterate again. And figure out what will and won't work. You have 15 balls in 150 balls at MasterCard here juggling. Which are the 117 that are completely irrelevant? And drop them as soon as possible to focus on the ones that matter. To create those experiences. It's basically the customers will tell you what they want. They will overwhelmingly say, I have this annoying problem, you need to solve it tomorrow. They'll tell you what they want. And most importantly, join their conversation on their terms. They're already talking about you. If anyone in this room believes there is not a consumer talking about your brand, you're totally naive. Find where they're talking about you. Engage the conversation. Not in a robot-like PR way, but in a way where you purely, genuinely want to seek to understand their pain points, their frustrations, their likes and dislikes, to help shape your organisation going forward. Last little plug, 4 books you should read. Simon Sinek's Start With Why. Awesome book about how Apple exists and why it exists, how they create products and what their mission is. The third screen, Chuck Martin's awesome book on how mobility works in the modern world across multiple industries. Bank 3.0, which is Brett's book, which I helped contribute a little bit. And Steve Blank's books, The 4 Stages to Epiphany. So let's summarise what my 4 things I want you to take away. First and foremost, get away from your desk. Get out of the building, have empathy for customers. Take the time to have a coffee buy them a coffee. What are their pain points? What they want to solve? Ask them questions. Get on Twitter. Who's complaining about HSBC? Then once you've got that insight, work with technology. Let technologists speak to that customer. It's amazing what happens when you put an engineer that can actually implement things with a customer. They have these like spark moments of creativity. And once that comes out, remember you are creating an experience, not just a product. How does that fit into a life cycle of a customer? And more important, I want you to innovate through experimentation. It's tiny little experiments. I'm not talking like, $10 million one-year projects. Tiny little projects that cost $10, $50, $100. I mean, ideas can easily be tested using things like landing page engines and whatnot to test A/B test methods and so forth. Because remember, the last point I want to leave you with is little Isaac is going to be a high net worth individual in 2030. The very customer that is basically the golden goose for banks. So that's the summation of my presentation, my contact details. I do have one last plug. I'm a charitable guy. On the 22nd of June, I'm going to go climb a mountain in Pakistan for an educational charity in Pakistan called Care Pakistan. I would love anyone's support if they can help. Jump onto my website. There's a donation site there. What I'll be doing is trekking 8 days up Naga Parat to raise money for the 1 million child mission, which is to educate 1 million children who are currently underprivileged in Pakistan. That's me. Thank you very much.
Lawsuit.